I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today. In this explainer, we're going to unpack a really fascinating, honestly pretty dense, but highly consequential Supreme Court decision from the Philippines. It's a case that revolves entirely around a massive payout error, navigating a total labyrinth of government bureaucracy, and ultimately asking a fundamental question of fairness when it comes to public funds. Okay, let's dive into this.
I want you to imagine opening your final severance check after decades of loyal service. You look at the number, and it is significantly higher than you might have calculated, like to the tune of nearly ~1,000,000 pesos extra. What do? Do you say something? Do you just cash it quietly? And most importantly, if the government later realizes they made a massive mathematical error, do you have the legal right to keep that money just because it wasn't your mistake? Well, that right there is the core legal mystery of the case we're analyzing today.
Section 1. A costly mathematical mistake.
So, to figure out how a colossal mistake like this could even happen in the first place, we gotta rewind a bit to 2001. The Philippine Congress enacted the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, which is commonly known as the Ipura Law. The main goal here was to privatize the power sector. And as part of this huge reorganization, a brand new entity called the National Transmission Corporation, or Transco, was created to handle transmission assets. But as privatization moved forward, Transco's functions were eventually handed off to a private concessionaire. And because of this shift, by June 2009, thousands of Transco employees had to be separated from service. To compensate these displaced workers, the Ipura Law actually guaranteed them a really generous separation pay. But by 2010, the Commission on Audit, which is basically the government's financial watchdog, started reviewing the books on all these payouts. And you know what? They found something very, very alarming. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it played out for one specific Transco employee, a legal researcher named Sabdullah T. Makapoti. Just take a second to think about the sheer gap between his standard compensation and his final exit check. Makapoti's basic monthly salary was a fairly modest $30,150, yet his separation check came out to nearly 3 million pesos. Specifically, $2,988,618.75. Even factoring in decades of service, a number like that raised immediate, glaring red flags for the auditors.
Section 2. The double multiplier. So how in the world did the accounting department arrive at a nearly 3 million peso payout for a mid-level legal researcher? Well, to figure that out, we have to look really closely at the actual formulas being used. On one hand, you have the legal formula dictated directly by the Ipura Law. It was super straightforward. You take the employee's basic salary, which includes a prorated 13th month pay, multiply it by their length of service, and then multiply that total by 1.5. Just a single, simple multiplier. But on the other hand, you have Transco CEO Circular 2009-0010. The president and CEO of Transco at the time, Arthur N. Aguilar, issued this circular to govern the whole separation program. The problem? The circular quietly introduced a second multiplier. It basically stated that for exceptional cases, employees with over 20 years of government service would have their length of service multiplied by 1.5 or even 2.0. This was completely, absolutely outside the bounds of the actual law.
And when you crunch the numbers, the real-world impact of that rogue formula is just wild. Sabdullah Makapoti had an actual, verifiable length of service of just under 43 years, 42.97 years to be totally exact. But because he fell into that over 31 years category created in the CEO's circular, his actual years of service were multiplied again. Suddenly, on paper, Makapoti's 43 years of service literally magically transformed into 61 years of credited service. That circular was drastically inflating the most important variable in the entire equation.
Section 3. The auditor steps in.
Enter the Commission on Audit. When they review government expenditures, they don't just look at a department's internal rules, right? They look at the actual law. So, COA Supervising Auditor Corazon V. Espano recalculated Makapoti's separation pay strictly using the legal Ipura formula, plugging in his actual 42.97 years of service. She arrived at a completely legal payout of roughly 2.1 million pesos. But remember, he was actually paid nearly 3 million. The difference between those two numbers is exactly $883,341.63. Auditor Espano immediately flagged this specific amount as an illegal overpayment and issued what is legally known as a notice of disallowance. Auditor Espano's reasoning here was incredibly precise. She stated, the adoption of multipliers in addition to the 1.5 monthly salary effectively increased the employee's length of service.
So, the crucial point is this. By artificially inflating the length of service, the CEO's circular had illegally sidestepped the strict financial boundaries set by the Philippine Congress in the IPRA law. This wasn't just a simple administrative oopsie, it was legally void.
Section 4.
Who takes the fall?
Look, once a notice of disallowance is issued, the government wants its money back. But who is legally responsible for paying it? Let's put our detective hats on and run down the suspects. The initial COA ruling actually cast a very wide net, holding multiple parties jointly and severally liable. We have Macapodi, the payee who actually received the funds. We have Susanna Singson, the division manager who verified the disbursement voucher. We've got Jose Mari Ilagan, the manager who certified the expense. We have the entire Transco board of directors who passed resolutions regarding the program. And finally, we have Arthur N. Aguilar, the president and CEO who literally authored the circular. That is our cast of characters. But as this case made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court of the Philippines, the justices had to systematically untangle this web and determine who actually bore the legal blame.
First up, let's look at the Transco Board of Directors. Now, initially, the COA held them liable. However, the Supreme Court ended up exonerating the board entirely. Why? Well, because when you look at the actual text of the board resolutions, they perfectly echoed the legal EPIR formula. The board did exactly what Congress told them to do. The root of the illegal disbursement was solely the CEO's circular, which, as we know, quietly incorporated that illegal extra multiplier without the board's explicit authorization. So the board completely cleared. Next, we look at middle management. Susanna Singson, the verifier, and Jose Marie Ilagan, the certifier. The Supreme Court eliminated them from the suspect list as well. The court noted that their actions were strictly administrative. Singson basically just verified that the right documents were attached, and Ilagan certified that the funds were available in the bank. They acted under the legal presumption of regularity and in total good faith, simply executing a direct order from their superior, the CEO. Without any proof of malice or gross negligence on their end, the law protects public officers who are just performing subordinate duties, so they are entirely absolved.
Section 5. The Supreme Court's verdict.
Okay, so this leaves us with two remaining figures. The CEO who wrote the flawed rule and the employee who walked away with the cash. To truly understand the court's final decision here, we need to understand this very specific Latin term, solutio indebiti. It is a fundamental civil law principle, essentially translating to payment of what is not due. And the concept is simple but absolutely ironclad. No one can be unjustly enriched at the expense of another. If something is received when there is zero right to demand it and it was unduly delivered through a mistake, the obligation to return it automatically arises. It creates what the law calls a constructive trust, which basically means you hold that money in trust for its rightful owner. And in this case, the owner is the government.
Let's move on and see how this builds into the modern legal precedent used by the court. The justices relied heavily on a landmark ruling known as Madeira v. COA, which establishes some very strict rules for returning disallowed government funds. Step 1. Officers who approve things in good faith aren't liable, which, as we saw, is exactly why Singson and Ilagan were cleared. Step 2. Officers who act in bad faith or gross negligence are solidarily liable. Step 3, and this is the absolute most critical part for our payee, recipients of disallowed amounts must return the funds regardless of whether they received them in good faith.
And here is the really tough reality for Sabdullah Macapati. The Supreme Court ruled that he must return the entire $883,341.63. The court totally acknowledged that Macapati was just a passive recipient. He didn't ask for the extra money, he definitely didn't manipulate the formula, and he very likely spent to believing it was rightfully his to keep. But under that principle of solutio indebiti and the Madeira rules, his good faith simply doesn't matter. It was a payment made through a clear, undeniable legal mistake. The money never belonged to him in the first place, so he cannot keep it.
The Supreme Court's language on this is undeniably strict, but you have to admit it's highly logical. They stated that the amount was already released to the employee through no fault of his own does not diminish the payment's patent illegality. The court is making a really definitive statement here. We simply cannot allow sympathy for an innocent employee to override the vital, absolute necessity of protecting public funds from illegal disbursement. An illegal payment is illegal, period. But hey, the court doesn't just punch down at the employee here. They also aim directly at the top. The court officially declared that Transco President and CEO Arthur N. Aguilar is the official responsible for this illegal ultravirus, which just means beyond his legal power, disbursement. Because his circular so blatantly violated the EPIR law, the court noted that this was a negligent act that completely negates good faith. The decision explicitly left the door wide open for the government to file the appropriate administrative or even criminal actions against him for causing this massive financial mess in the first place. This case just perfectly encapsulates the fascinating friction that happens when government bureaucracy, math, and the strict letter of the law all collide. We have an entirely innocent employee who's forced to return a life-changing sum of money and a powerful CEO officially flagged for an illegal directive. It leaves us with a really profound question to ponder. When balancing an employee's innocent mistake against the absolute vital protection of public funds, where should the law draw the line? Did the Supreme Court get it right in this million-peso mystery? Let that question sit with you for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll see you next time as we unpack another fascinating topic.